You wake up in the year 1243. You have no idea how you got here. One minute you were scrolling through your phone in bed, doom scrolling through memes about existential dread, and the next, poof. You've got straw in your hair, your mouth tastes like disappointment, and the ceiling is made of wood, not drywall. You sit up, groggy, confused, and sore in places you didn't know could hurt. Welcome to the 13th century. Everything smells vaguely of goat, and the blanket wrapped around you is roughly the same texture as a kitchen sponge soaked in broth. Someone in the next room is either chanting, praying, or dying. Possibly all three. There's a jug of something suspiciously thick beside your bed. It might be water. It might be beer. It might be the Middle Ages version of NyQuil. You're not ready to find out. And as your eyes adjust to the dim, smoky light, because yes, the air is filled with smoke, since chimneys won't become a real thing for another couple of centuries, you stumble to the door and creak it open. The sky outside is dark, and above you is a long, glowing smear across the heavens, the Milky Way. You gasp, not because it's beautiful, it is, but because you realize people in this time had no idea what that was. It is, to them, not a galaxy, not a swirling collection of billions of stars. No. It's either a path of milk spilled by the gods, or the literal trail of light left behind by the souls of the dead. Sleep tight. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's falling asleep with medieval cosmology whispering in their ears. Weird hobby, but I respect it. All right, deep breath. Let's unravel what medieval people actually believed about the Milky Way, that glowing celestial smear you now know is full of stars, and they absolutely did not. The thing is, the Middle Ages weren't one monolithic chunk of time. There were early medieval thinkers, Islamic astronomers, Byzantine theologians, and later scholastic philosophers, each with their own theories, ranging from the poetically ridiculous to the surprisingly insightful. But to be clear, nobody thought it was a galaxy. The word galaxy itself comes from the Greek galaxias kyklos, literally, milky circle. And yes, ancient people noticed it, and no, they didn't think of telescopes. You, standing in a medieval village, staring up at the sky, are basically looking at the most mysterious stretch of light imaginable. It has no name in your local dialect. It doesn't have a scientific explanation. It's just there, glowing, unmoving, watching you like an eye that never blinks. And of course, people had thoughts. Let's start with the basics. If you're living in 13th century Europe, you probably believe in something resembling the Ptolemaic model of the universe. That's the ancient Greek version, courtesy of Ptolemy, where the earth is at the center of everything, because of course it is, you self-important little dirt goblin. The sun, moon, planets, and stars all orbit around us in perfect spheres. There are no galaxies. There's no vast, cold emptiness. Just concentric crystal orbs and God sitting in the outermost sphere like a cosmic theater kid waiting for his cue. In this universe, the Milky Way is either a flaw in the celestial sphere or a divine feature. Either way, it's not a bunch of stars. That would be too easy. Now, if you're literate, and statistically, you are not, you might know that Aristotle himself thought the Milky Way was a kind of combustion. Seriously. His theory was that the upper atmosphere could sometimes ignite due to the movement of heavenly bodies and fiery vapors. You know, like when you leave your hummus out too long and the air catches fire. Totally normal. Aristotle believed this burning glow was a sublunar phenomenon, meaning it happened below the moon's orbit, which in ancient cosmology was the dividing line between the earthly and the heavenly. So the Milky Way wasn't celestial. It was just bad weather. With fire. In space. Very relaxing. But this idea, while spicy, didn't last forever. Fast forward a few centuries, and medieval Islamic scholars had a lot to say. And by a lot, I mean they were doing actual math while European monks were still arguing about whether angels had digestive systems. Spoiler, they do not. One of the earliest serious thinkers was Al-Farghani, a 9th century Persian astronomer who catalogued the stars with impressive accuracy. He described the Milky Way as a cloud made of very small stars. And yes, this is closer to the truth. But even he didn't quite land the plane. He didn't think of it as a galaxy, just as a misty streak of starlight. Which, To be fair, it looks like. Through the naked eye, the Milky Way is just a hazy band across the sky. No twinkling stars, no nebulae, no zooming in to see other solar systems. Just cosmic smear. Then came Ibn al-Haytham, the absolute overachiever of the 11th century. He figured out optics, wrote treatises on visual perception, and argued that the Milky Way wasn't atmospheric at all. He claimed it was beyond the moon, in the realm of the stars, which, again, was actually correct. But nobody listened, because, science is boring when you're trying to stay warm in a hovel with rats and God breathing down your neck. Meanwhile, in Europe, people were not doing well. They clung to Aristotle's fire smear theory, or sometimes even weirder ones. Like this fun idea, the Milky Way is a celestial excretion, basically the sky's dandruff. Some versions of medieval thought believed it was a discharge of corrupted ether, the mysterious fifth element that was supposedly what stars were made of. In other words, the Milky Way was a galactic fart trail. Delightful. Others, especially theologians, leaned into mythology. The Greek myth of Hera spilling her breast milk as she yanked baby Hercules away, that one stuck around. Christian scholars didn't exactly endorse it, but the idea of celestial milk was strangely popular. Because nothing says pious scholarship like imagining the Virgin Mary breastfeeding the cosmos. And then there were the Neoplatonists. These were the philosophers who missed Plato so much they tried to cosplay as his ghost. They believed the Milky Way was a literal road for souls. When you died, your spirit floated up through the spheres of the planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, all the way up, until you reached the Milky Way, the final glowing threshold before you passed into the divine realm. Kind of like TSA for heaven. This theory, though unscientific, had real staying power. People loved it, probably because it gave meaning to the streak in the sky they couldn't explain. Imagine dying in agony from a combination of dysentery and spiritual anxiety, and then looking up to see your salvation written in milk across the heavens. Comforting. In a bleak house sort of way. You lean against a wooden fence, staring at the Milky Way with your 13th century peasant eyes, and you feel small. The night is cold, the stars are steady, and you realize no one in your village, not the priest, not the traveling monk, not the guy who sells suspicious sausages, has a clue what that glowing band is. And you know what? Neither do you. Because this is 1243, and Galileo won't point a telescope at the sky for another 360 years. You're more likely to be accused of witchcraft for staring too long at the sky than you are to discover anything about it. The darkness deepens. A dog barks somewhere. The stars don't twinkle here, they shine like frost caught in a candle. The Milky Way arches overhead, and you wonder, for a second, if the souls of the dead really do walk that path. Maybe they do. Or maybe it's just the universe's way of telling you that you don't know anything and never will. Back in your room, the straw mattress waits. It smells faintly of mildew and betrayal. The jug beside it, still thick, still mysterious. You lie down. The fire burns low. The smoke gathers in the rafters like forgotten dreams. And the Milky Way, that ancient smear of mystery, watches you sleep. But don't worry. This is only the beginning. Tomorrow, we'll dive deeper into the philosophy, the poetry, the art, and the arguments that raged about this celestial smear. Some people thought it was a river. Others, a wound in the heavens. One guy thought it was the residue left by a war between stars. He had issues. Sleep now. You're in the Middle Ages, and the universe is very confusing. You wake up coughing. The fire is out, the air is cold, and your lungs feel like they've been lovingly massaged with chimichurri and sadness. It's still night, or maybe it's morning. There's no clock, no notifications, no alarm. Just a rooster somewhere, practicing its scream. Apparently, roosters don't just crow at dawn. They crow whenever they feel like it. Like some kind of feathered nihilist. You sit up. The room is damp, as always. Your blanket smells like someone else's sins. You hear the sound of someone outside using a bucket. The rhythmic slosh of water, or possibly ale, depending on their priorities. Your joints creak like haunted furniture. Welcome to another day in the 13th century, where breakfast is barley and regret, and your knowledge of the stars is both wrong and poetic. You step outside into the pre-dawn murk, and there it is again, the Milky Way. Faint, eerie, and definitely still mysterious. If you didn't know better, you'd think it was watching you, judging your medieval fashion choices. Tunic and wool hose. No underwear. Brave. Let's talk more about what medieval people thought that heavenly smear was. Because if there's one thing the Middle Ages had plenty of, it was opinions. And most of them were incredibly wrong. But hey, soothingly wrong. Like a bedtime story with extra incense and chronic misunderstanding. Yesterday we touched on the Aristotelian theory of burning vapors, and how Islamic scholars like Al-Farghani and Ibn al-Haytham started poking holes in that flaming cloud nonsense. But today, we go weirder. Much weirder. Because Europe, in its glorious fog of theological smoke and scholastic ambition, tried to explain the Milky Way using philosophy, theology, and just a dash of good old-fashioned celestial anxiety. First up, Thomas Aquinas. The medieval philosopher equivalent of that one guy in your group project who insists on citing 400 sources and rewriting everything in Latin. Aquinas lived in the 13th century and was obsessed with reconciling classical philosophy with Christian theology. A noble goal. Also a deeply exhausting one. Aquinas believed the Milky Way was a kind of celestial illusion, visible only because of the limitations of human sight. Basically, he argued, the glow we perceive isn't actually in the heavens. It's just how our flawed eyeballs interpret the clustering of many tiny stars. So the Milky Way exists, but it's more like an optical artifact. Like when you stare at a light bulb too long and see floating dots. Except, for your soul. And yes, Aquinas was borrowing from earlier thinkers like Averroes, the Islamic polymath who loved Aristotle a little too much. Averroes, in turn, had hated the idea that the Milky Way was a fiery mist. He thought that was undignified. His version, it's just the accumulated light of too many stars in one place, seen by imperfect eyes from a very sad planet. He said this in the 1100s. Basically medieval astrophysics. And still, no one quite got it. But Aquinas wasn't alone in his interpretation. Enter Albertus Magnus. His name literally means Albert the Great, which tells you everything you need to know about how modest medieval scholars were. Albertus agreed that the Milky Way was the result of tightly packed stars, but unlike Aquinas, he tried to locate it within the heavens, not just in our perception. In other words, he was inching toward an actual model, still wrong, still philosophical, but at least pointing in the vague direction of science. Of course, this led to arguments, scholastic debates, parchment-based throwdowns over the nature of light, stars, and what exactly counts as celestial mist. Imagine two old monks, hunched over a candlelit desk, furiously citing Aristotle while their teeth rot out of their skulls. All because they can't agree on whether the Milky Way is made of stars or cosmic dandruff. And we haven't even mentioned Dante yet. Oh yes, Dante Alighieri. Mr. Inferno, the medieval poet who described hell as a bureaucratic meat grinder and imagined the afterlife as a series of increasingly complicated staircases. Dante saw the Milky Way too, and he had thoughts. In his work Paradiso, he referenced the white strip, that the Milky Way, saying it was something scholars had failed to agree on. Which was true. No one agreed. Not scientists. Not poets. Not theologians. The consensus was somewhere between stars, souls, and flammable divine milk. Now, here's where it gets oddly adorable. Some medieval people believed the Milky Way was a kind of heavenly bridge. Literally, a road. Like a shimmering highway in the sky. One that led to paradise. And sometimes, to Valhalla, depending on whether you were reading Norse sagas or just having a particularly strong mug of fermented turnip juice. This concept was especially common in Northern European folklore. In Norse mythology, there's Bifrost, the rainbow bridge connecting Earth to Asgard. While not exactly the Milky Way, some later interpretations blurred the lines, imagining that streak in the sky as a kind of cosmic off-ramp for dead warriors. Which, to be fair, is a pretty badass way to interpret a galaxy. Meanwhile, in Christian Europe, the Milky Way occasionally showed up in mystical visions. Saints would describe seeing it in dreams, sometimes as a ladder, sometimes as a river of light. In one 14th century vision, a nun claimed the Milky Way was made of the sighs of the faithful. Romantic. Also terrifying. A bridge of sighs in the literal sense. But not everyone was poetic. Some people, especially in rural areas, didn't care what Aristotle thought. They just made up their own stories. Farmers in parts of Germany thought the Milky Way was the trail of hay scattered by celestial reapers. In parts of France, it was called the Hen's Way, a road walked by heavenly chickens. Chickens. In the sky. This was before Netflix. People were bored. Now, let's talk about medieval art. Because if you're staring at manuscripts hoping to find a scientifically accurate rendering of the Milky Way, you will be disappointed. Medieval artists depicted it in two basic ways, a white stripe in the sky or a bizarre cloudy worm floating behind saints' heads. Sometimes it's dotted with stars. Sometimes it looks like someone spilled their ink and just rolled with it. Precision was not the priority. But in illuminated manuscripts, you do occasionally get glimpses of medieval cosmology, charts of the universe, diagrams of concentric spheres. The Earth in the middle, surrounded by water, air, fire, planets, and stars. Then the prime mover, aka God, lounging on the edge like a cosmic barista who's given up. In these charts, the Milky Way is usually a band near the sphere of fixed stars, a decorative flourish, or a warning, sometimes labeled, sometimes not, usually misunderstood. And we still haven't mentioned the best part, astrology. Yes, in medieval times, astrology and astronomy were basically roommates who hated each other. Astronomers tried to chart the heavens, astrologers tried to make the heavens all about you. And while astrology didn't say much about the Milky Way directly, the general vibe of celestial mysticism meant that everything in the sky was personal. A star moves? That's your cousin getting engaged. A comet appears? Someone important is about to die. The Milky Way shines brighter than usual? It's probably a sign. Of what? That's for your local astrologer to guess, scribble, and then dramatically blame on Mercury. You lie down again on your straw mattress. A beetle crawls near your foot. It's not a threat, just a roommate. You stare at the wooden ceiling and think about all the people who, for centuries, looked up at the same sky, saw the same glowing band of light, and had no clue what it was. They wrote poems about it, argued about it, built cosmologies around it. They tried to fit it into neat categories, milk, fire, water, souls, because the unknown is scary and categories make it less so, even if those categories are wrong. And what's wild is, none of them needed to be right. The Milky Way didn't care. It just kept glowing, quietly, softly, like a nightlight for an entire planet of confused little bipeds. So here you are, back in the 13th century, thinking about souls walking bridges and stars making illusions and Aristotle's flaming burps of celestial air. The world is quiet. The fire is crackling. Your muscles ache. Your mind drifts. And out there in the night, the Milky Way waits. Patient. Eternal. Beautifully misunderstood. Sleep now. You'll need it. Because next time, we're going even deeper. Into Galileo, telescopes, revolutions, heresies, and the long road from divine milk to spiral arms. But for now, just breathe. Let the past wrap around you like a very itchy wool blanket. And remember, you are small, the universe is vast, and everyone before you was just as confused as you are now. And somehow, that's comforting. You wake up again. At this point, you're not sure if it's even morning anymore or just a dream within a dream sponsored by breadcrumbs and sleep deprivation. Your back hurts in 5 different ways, all of which are considered incurable in this century. You stretch, which mostly consists of shifting your shoulders slightly and wincing. You hear church bells. They toll like God forgot his AirPods were in. You stumble outside. The sky is faintly pink, like someone tried to paint it with berry juice and gave up halfway. And there it is again, your old friend, the Milky Way. It streaks across the fading sky, still faint, still wrong, still very much not made of milk, despite centuries of rumor and ecclesiastical branding. But today, something's different. A man in Florence has just finished polishing some glass. Yes, the telescope. The thing that will ruin everyone's favorite sky theories and make the church deeply uncomfortable for the next few hundred years. Let's talk about Galileo Galilei, the man, the myth, the heretic, the father of modern astronomy, and also, according to some people at the time, a professional blasphemer with a deeply suspicious nose. Galileo was born in 1564. That's Renaissance time, baby. Leonardo da Vinci had just died. Shakespeare was probably getting into poetry fights in taverns. And the Catholic Church was, how do we put this politely, micromanaging the universe. For centuries, people had assumed the sky was perfect and unchanging, that everything up there was divine and eternal and moved in nice, predictable circles like a cosmic music box. But Galileo looked through his telescope in 1609 and saw things he should not have seen. He pointed that little tube of magnified betrayal at the Milky Way, and guess what? It wasn't a mist. It wasn't a smear of spiritual dairy. It was thousands upon thousands of tiny stars, too small to see with the naked eye, but real. So real, in fact, that they made the whole band of light look like a glitter explosion in deep space. It was like he peeled the sky open and found out it was made of Lego bricks instead of divine light. Now, this didn't go over well. You have to understand, Galileo wasn't just challenging one theory. He was kicking over the entire cosmic Jenga tower. The geocentric model, crumbling. The idea of heavenly perfection, shattered. The smooth celestial spheres, now dented, pockmarked, and, heaven forbid, imperfect. He was, in effect, yelling plot twist into the face of 1,500 years of tradition. You can imagine the monks clutching their robes. Galileo published his findings in a charming little book titled Sidereus Nuncius, or Starry Messenger, which sounds like a children's bedtime story, until you read it and realize it's mostly just a long list of everyone before me was wrong footnotes. And people read it. Some were amazed, others were confused, and many were just angry. Because science, it turns out, is much less comforting than theology. It doesn't tell you what the stars mean, just what they're made of. And frankly, that's not nearly as fun. But Galileo wasn't alone in this mess. Enter Johannes Kepler, the man who looked at circles and said, "Nah, make it ugly." Kepler, working slightly before and then alongside Galileo, had already been figuring out that planetary orbits weren't perfect circles. They were ellipses. Lopsided, awkward, mathematically tragic ellipses. And in the early 1600s, he too turned his eyes to the Milky Way. He agreed it was made of stars, not vapors, not souls, just a massive, chaotic pile of stars scattered through space like celestial breadcrumbs. But unlike Galileo, Kepler tried to keep things a little more theological. He wrote about divine geometry and tried to find spiritual meaning in the math. His work was like a cosmic love letter to both God and trigonometry. He believed in harmony and sacred proportions and possibly sleep deprivation. Now here's the ironic part. All these new observations, these telescopes, these books, they were confirming something that had been guessed centuries earlier by Islamic scholars. Remember Al-Hazen? Back in the 11th century, he had already said the Milky Way was made of countless faint stars. But medieval Europe ignored that. Because of course it did. Fast forward to the Renaissance, and suddenly Europeans are rediscovering it like it's a brand new idea. Guys, what if the Milky Way is just a lot of stars? Groundbreaking. Centuries late, but groundbreaking. Let's take a moment to appreciate how long it took humanity to figure this out. You've got ancient Babylonians tracking the stars, Greek philosophers throwing around the word ether like it's confetti, Islamic astronomers doing complex math while Europe was still poking at relics, and then finally Galileo going, "Hey, what if we looked at it?" A truly shocking idea. Just look. And when they did, the Milky Way stopped being mystical and started being overwhelming. Because if that smudge in the sky was made of thousands of stars, then the universe was bigger than anyone thought. Much bigger. Terrifyingly big. Existential crisis big. Stars weren't just pinholes in a dome, they were suns. Far away. Possibly with their own worlds. Possibly with their own confused people staring at our Milky Way and calling it something equally wrong. Let that sink in. The idea that the night sky was just a pretty ceiling collapsed overnight. And people panicked in the most respectable, scholarly way possible, with debates, pamphlets, and the occasional house arrest. Galileo, of course, would eventually be tried by the Inquisition, not just for his Milky Way opinions, but for supporting the idea that the Earth moved. Heresy, obviously. Everyone knows the Earth stays still, and the sun just does laps like it's training for a cosmic marathon. But despite being silenced, his telescope cracked open the door to modern astronomy. And through that crack, humanity saw, finally, clearly, what the Milky Way actually was. A galaxy. Our galaxy. Billions of stars. Not a mist, not milk, not a ghost highway, not God's paintbrush. Just stars. So many that they blur together into a soft ribbon of light across the sky. No wonder it took so long to figure out. It's hard to see clearly when you're busy surviving feudalism and bathing twice a year. So you roll over, now fully Renaissance-pilled. You've just learned that the sky is huge, mostly empty, and full of massive nuclear balls of fire. Somehow, that's both terrifying and relaxing. You close your eyes. Inhale the smoky night. And as your consciousness starts to drift, you remember one last fact. The name Milky Way stuck. Despite all the corrections, the better theories, the precise measurements, and the satellites we've launched into space, we still call it the Milky Way. Because of some Greeks with overactive imaginations and a disturbing amount of dairy metaphors. There's something oddly beautiful about that. Mistakes don't always go away. Sometimes they become tradition. Sleep now. You've survived the Renaissance. The universe is bigger. The questions are harder. But your mattress is still made of straw and fleas, so honestly, not much has changed. Next time, we'll explore how the Milky Way became a galaxy, and how humanity reacted when it realized it wasn't even close to the center of the universe. Spoiler, we took it badly. You wake up to a rooster that sounds like it's dying. It probably is. You're in the early 1700s now, and your room smells like candles, powdered wigs, and the very specific despair that comes from knowing your chamber pot is full, and it's not even breakfast yet. You shuffle to the window. The sky is still dark, like someone spilled indigo ink across it and tried to mop it up with a bar towel. There's the Milky Way again, ribboning across the heavens like a pale, smug mistake you keep re-encountering. But now, things are different. The telescope is no longer a novelty. It's a full-blown science machine, and every wealthy European with a powdered wig and a Napoleon complex is peeking through it, convinced they're the next Copernicus. The problem is, they're all seeing different things and writing long, dramatic essays about it. You know what this means. It's Enlightenment time. This is the century of systems. The age of diagrams, wigs, corsets, and arguments over planetary motion that would make your sleep-deprived brain cry. But it's also the age when humanity finally started to realize how horrifyingly not central we are to the cosmos. Let's meet the Mun of the hour, Thomas Wright of Durham. English astronomer. The kind of guy who looked up at the sky and went, you know what this needs? Geometry and mild depression. In 1750, Wright wrote a book called An Original Theory or New Hypothesis of the Universe. If that sounds like something a Mun yells into the void after a midlife crisis, you're not wrong. Wright was a devout Christian, but also a mathematician, which means he had the unique talent of blending theology and trigonometry in a way that confused absolutely everyone. So what did he say about the Milky Way? According to Wright, the Milky Way wasn't just a band of stars, it was a shell. A spherical shell of stars encasing the solar system. And we, being somewhere near the middle of this disco ball, saw the stars as a band because we were looking through the thickest part of the shell. It was a neat theory. Mostly wrong, but neat. He thought the universe was hierarchical, with stars organized into cosmic structures like nested Russian dolls. Galaxies, he said, were systems of systems, maybe even island universes. He called them that before anyone really knew what that meant. Island universes. It sounds poetic until you realize it means you are so alone. This idea caught the attention of another star-loving gentleman, Immanuel Kant. Yes, that Kant. The one you had to pretend to understand in philosophy class while silently Googling categorical imperative. Turns out, before he was ruining dinner parties with ethics, Kant was also making theories about the cosmos. In 1755, just 5 years after Wright's cosmic spiral idea, Kant published Universal Natural History and Theory of the Heavens. Rolls off the tongue. In it, Kant proposed that the Milky Way was a massive, rotating disk of stars, and that the blurry star clouds we saw in telescopes might be other galaxies, just like ours. He didn't call them galaxies, because the word didn't exist in that way yet. But he described the structure. He said, in essence, hey, what if the Milky Way isn't the universe, just one of many? Cue the quiet, intellectual screaming of 18th century Europe. Because up until now, even with Galileo's scandalous telescope peeping and Copernicus' heliocentric mic drops, people still largely thought of the Milky Way as the structure of everything. The only one. The cosmic apartment we all shared. But Kant was like, guys, I think we live in a cul-de-sac. Imagine how horrifying that is. You spend your whole life thinking the sky is this perfect divine dome above your head, and now some German philosopher with a powdered wig and 0 party invites is saying you live in one spiral galaxy out of maybe millions. And that's just the beginning. This is the point in history where the universe stops being comforting and starts becoming terrifying. The Enlightenment's obsession with categorization, classification, and empirical truth strips the stars of their mystery and replaces it with numbers. Lots of numbers. Star catalogs. Angular velocities. Charts. So many charts. You've now entered the age of the celestial spreadsheet. Enter William Herschel, a German-born British astronomer born in 1738, who, along with his sister Caroline, decided that sleeping was for cowards and they were going to map the galaxy. By hand. With telescopes they built themselves. Let's pause for a moment to admire that. Imagine trying to understand the shape of your house by peeking through the keyhole for 20 years while also inventing the keyhole yourself. That's Herschel. He built over 400 telescopes. His largest had a 40-foot tube. It looked like someone had tried to build a cannon for fighting God. With this, he cataloged thousands of stars and nebulae, and by the late 1700s, he and Caroline attempted the first structural map of the Milky Way. Spoiler, they got the basic shape mostly right. A flattened disk with a bulge in the center. Like a cosmic pancake having a bad day. But Herschel believed the sun was at the center of this disk. Which is understandable. Humans have a long tradition of putting themselves in the middle of things. It makes us feel warm and important. Turns out, we are not. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. In this chapter, people still think the Milky Way is everything. The universe is still considered just this. One galaxy. One sprawling, star-speckled swirl with us right in the middle, like cosmic royalty. And honestly, it's kinda cute. People still held onto ideas like fixed stars and the firmament. The term galaxy was starting to emerge, but it wasn't until the 19th century that anyone began seriously considering that other spiral shapes in the sky might be other galaxies, not just clouds or weird space tumors. Still, the Enlightenment gave us something powerful, the scale of the Milky Way. We finally had an inkling that it wasn't just a smear in the sky, it was a massive, structured object. A thing with dimension, rotation, gravitational behavior. A stellar metropolis spanning hundreds of thousands of light years. Just knowing that changed the vibe of the night sky forever. You look up now, through your slightly grimy Enlightenment-era window, and instead of seeing a myth or a goddess or a spilled cup of milk, you see structure, geometry, physics. It's less romantic, but more real. And real can be beautiful too. You lie back down. The bed's still lumpy. Your wig itches. But you've just lived through the dawn of cosmic perspective. You now understand that the Milky Way is not a painting, not a legend, not a celestial fart. It's a galaxy. And maybe there are others. It's getting harder to fall asleep now. Because if the Milky Way is one of many, then where does it end? What else is out there? How far does it go? Don't worry. Those questions will drive 19th and 20th century scientists slowly mad. You can rest now. Let them figure it out. You've done enough galaxy gazing for 1 century. You wake up. Again. You're getting really good at this. Your neck feels like you slept on a small cannonball, and your mouth tastes like you chewed on a dusty curtain. Welcome to the late 1800s. Things smell faintly of soot, coal smoke, and complicated social hierarchies. You light a gas lamp because electricity hasn't reached your part of town yet. You peek outside. The sky above is still dark and speckled with stars. The Milky Way arcs overhead like a cosmic smudge. You know it's full of stars now. You're one of the smart ones. But here's the thing, you still think that's it. The Milky Way is the universe. The whole thing. A single, self-contained disk of celestial content, like a divine DVD. And everything, lives inside it. Except, some fuzzy little annoyances are starting to mess with that picture. Enter the spiral nebulae. They've been on the radar for a while. These faint, cloudy smudges that appear in telescopes but don't resolve into nice, polite stars. Some of them look like spirals. Others just resemble lint. Astronomers have been cataloging them since the 1700s, but nobody knows what they actually are. Are they inside the Milky Way? Are they gas clouds? Are they just very dirty stars having a bad hair day? We don't know. Not yet. You are now living in what might be the most awkward period in astronomy, the time when scientists almost know what's going on but still get most of it wrong. They have better telescopes, better math, better instruments, but they're still working on hunches and guesswork and letters that take 6 months to arrive by ship. This brings us to 1920. Yes, we're skipping ahead. Because between 1850 and 1920, not much happens that would keep you awake. It's mostly people building slightly better telescopes and writing long letters about how confusing the sky is. But in 1920, something glorious occurs, a fight. Not a fistfight. This is academia, which means it's a debate with diagrams, smug expressions, and at least 2 monocles in the room. It's called the Great Debate, not to be confused with the slightly more violent Great War that had just ended. On one side, Harlow Shapley, a man with a name that sounds like he was born wearing a cravat. Shapley argued that the Milky Way was absolutely gigantic, and everything, including the spiral nebulae, existed within it. On the other side, Heber Curtis, who believed the Milky Way was not the whole universe. He said those spiral nebulae were other galaxies, entire other star systems, other Milky Ways. Curtis was, scientifically speaking, throwing down the gauntlet. Imagine being in that room. One side saying, everything we see lives in this one galactic neighborhood, and the other side is like, buddy, we're in the suburbs of an intergalactic city. Open your eyes. And then came the cosmic mic drop. His name was Edwin Hubble. Yes, that Hubble. The one with the telescope named after him. Spoiler, he earns that telescope. In the 1920s, Hubble was working with the most powerful telescope in the world at the time, located at Mount Wilson Observatory in California. It was, essentially, a giant eyeball strapped to a mountain. Hubble pointed it at one of those fuzzy spiral blobs, specifically the Andromeda Nebula. And what he found changed everything. Inside that blur, he identified something called Cepheid variable stars. Now, I won't make you memorize that term. Just know this, they're a type of star that pulses in brightness in a predictable way. And by measuring that pulse, you can figure out how far away they are. So Hubble did the math, probably while chain-smoking and looking dramatically into space. And the result? Andromeda was over 2 million light-years away. Let that sink in. That's outside the Milky Way. Way outside. So congratulations. You're no longer the center of the universe. You're not even the center of the galaxy. You're just somewhere, floating. The Milky Way, it turns out, is just one galaxy among billions. And this galaxy, the one medieval poets described as a path of milk and Aristotle called celestial exhalation, and Kant tried to diagram like it was a family tree, is just a little swirl in a much bigger cosmic stew. It's humbling. It's terrifying. It's strangely comforting, too. Because now, when you look up, you're not seeing everything. You're just seeing home. One little spiral. One little fleck of light. And beyond it, countless others. Astronomers called them island universes at first. Then galaxies. Galaxies with different shapes, spiral, elliptical, irregular, like badly drawn pizza slices. Some smaller than ours. Many bigger. The Milky Way, despite its poetic name, is just average. Not the biggest, not the prettiest, not the most exciting. It's the Toyota Corolla of galaxies. Reliable, slightly dusty, definitely not winning any beauty contests. And you little dust mote of carbon, are riding shotgun in one of its outer arms, in a star system that takes 230 million years to make one galactic orbit. Congratulations. You are spectacularly insignificant. But here's the kicker, the more we learned, the more beautiful it became. We started using radio telescopes, measuring background radiation, scanning for distant redshifts. And everywhere we looked, more galaxies. Billions, possibly trillions. Each one with its own stars. Each star with its own planets. Some of those planets possibly with their own life. And every one of them looking up at their night sky, seeing their version of the Milky Way. Maybe they call it something else. Maybe they think it's a divine trail of light. Maybe they tell stories about it, too. That's the legacy of the Milky Way. Not that it's unique, but that it's ours. And we saw it. We named it. We were wrong about it for thousands of years, but we cared. We looked up. We wondered. You lie back now, heart gently brimming with insignificance. The Milky Way is just one swirl in a cosmic storm. But it's your swirl. The same one your ancestors saw. The same one medieval monks argued about. The same one Galileo squinted at, Kant theorized over, and Hubble redefined. It's still there. It always will be. Even when you're not. Sleep now. You've made it to the edge of the universe. And all it cost you was your sense of cosmic importance. You wake up in a government observatory in the 1950s. Everything is beige. Even the coffee tastes beige. You're surrounded by piles of paper, metal dials, and cigarette smoke so thick it's probably classified as a weather system. You're an astronomer now. You've got a name badge. It says Dr. Sleep Deprived. Welcome to the Cold War, where people are either launching satellites into space or worried those satellites are spying on them. But your job? You're trying to figure out what the Milky Way actually looks like. Which is a bit like trying to figure out the shape of a forest while duct taped to the side of a tree. You can't get outside the Milky Way to take a photo. There are no drones. No Instagram satellite selfies. Just radio waves. So that's what you use. See, starlight doesn't help much. It gets blocked by dust. And there's a lot of dust. Not the fun kind you find under your couch. This is cosmic dust, basically microscopic soot floating around in vast clouds, just waiting to ruin your observations and any chance of a decent night's sleep. But radio waves? They can sneak through the dust like little interstellar spies. Specifically, radio waves at 21 centimeters, emitted by neutral hydrogen atoms. Why does this matter? Because the galaxy is full of hydrogen. It's the most basic and most common element in the universe. If the Milky Way were a soup, hydrogen would be the water. So by scanning the sky with radio telescopes, you can see where all that hydrogen is, how it's moving, how fast it's spinning, and how much of it there is. You and your colleagues spend years doing this. Long nights, coffee, caffeine pills, a steady descent into radio frequency madness. And slowly, a pattern emerges. The hydrogen is distributed in spiral arms. 4 major ones. Maybe more. Possibly fewer. Depends on who you ask and how much sleep they've had. They twist around a central bulge, like the arms of a whirlpool or the flaps of a cosmic cinnamon roll. And the sun? Our beloved source of life, sunburns, and solar-powered calculators? It's not in the center. Not even close. We're out in the suburbs. About 26,000 light-years from the middle, parked in the Orion arm. Not even one of the main arms. Just a little spur between the Sagittarius and Perseus arms. Basically the galactic version of living in a cul-de-sac near a gas station. And what's at the center, you ask? Oh, just a supermassive black hole. No big deal. We call it Sagittarius A*, because naming cosmic death vortexes after star signs apparently makes them less terrifying. It sits in the galactic core like an interstellar Roomba, hoovering up anything that gets too close. It's 4 million times the mass of the sun. And thankfully, nowhere near your solar power toaster. But back to the map. With all this radio data, by the late 1950s and 60s, astronomers produced the first serious structural maps of the Milky Way. They're crude. More like a napkin sketch than a Google Earth satellite view. But they reveal a few essential facts. The Milky Way is a barred spiral galaxy. Yes, barred. Like it got arrested. Or has a central bar-shaped structure made of stars. Take your pick. It has spiral arms that are uneven, messy, and full of star-forming regions. The disk is about 100,000 light-years across. And it's warped. Yes, warped. Like a vinyl record left in the sun. No one knows why for a while. Turns out, the Milky Way is being gravitationally yanked on by its satellite galaxies. Kind of like trying to keep a pizza flat while people keep tugging at the crust. Oh yes, the Milky Way has satellites. Over 50 of them. Tiny galaxies orbiting us like anxious little moths. Some are being slowly consumed. Others just hang around awkwardly. The most famous are the Large and Small Magellanic Clouds, which, if you live in the southern hemisphere, you can see with the naked eye. From medieval milk trails to 20th century star charts. You're now living in a time when we finally understand what the Milky Way is, where we are in it, how big it is, and that it's still just one among billions. But that doesn't stop humans from trying to find meaning. We name the arms. We plot the positions of nebulae. We catalog stars by spectral class, temperature, motion, and how likely they are to explode. And yet, every new discovery opens a new question. Like, why does the galaxy have a halo of dark matter? Why are some stars older than the galaxy itself? Why is there a weird stream of stars that looks like someone spilled a glittery milkshake through space? Science answers some of these. Others? We're still guessing. Because when you're floating in a 100,000 light-year-wide spinning pancake made of gas, fire, and physics, some mysteries just don't want to be solved. You stare up at the ceiling now, imagining the view from outside. If you could hover 1,000,000 light-years away and look back, you'd see the Milky Way as a gentle swirl of light. Faint, modest, elegant. Billions of stars, billions of worlds, all turning quietly in the dark. And somewhere, on one of those worlds, in a small room, a sleepy human is trying to fall asleep while learning about it. You're not alone. You never were. You wake up. Again. Not in a monastery or observatory this time, but beside a fire. In a forest. Somewhere deep in time. The smell of smoke and moss fills your lungs. The air is cool. There are no clocks, no lights, no phones. Just darkness. And above you, 1,000,000 stars. And slicing through them, the Milky Way. It glows faintly, like a trail left by something ancient. A long, pale ribbon stretching from one end of the world to the other. You look up at it. You don't have a name for it yet, but you feel that it matters. And you're not the only one. Let's begin with the Sand people of southern Africa, among the oldest continuous cultures on Earth. For them, the Milky Way is not a galaxy. It is a trail of embers, a fire left behind by an old woman walking through the sky, flinging ashes into the air to light her path. It's a quiet, beautiful image. One you can imagine seeing from a desert, where stars are not dimmed by pollution or street lamps, but blaze silently in infinite rows. In Zulu mythology, the Milky Way is called Umthala. It is a road, a spiritual one, a path for the ancestors to travel at night. Imagine that every time you look up at the Milky Way, you're watching a highway of ghosts. Your great-great-grandparents just strolling along, maybe judging your decisions, maybe just trying to find the cosmic equivalent of a rest stop. In Australia, Aboriginal peoples have their own interpretations. One of the most famous is from the Yalagu people, who don't just see the Milky Way as a streak of stars, but as a river in the sky. Along this celestial river swims the rainbow serpent, a powerful ancestral being. The dark dust lanes, those smoky gaps between the stars, are not emptiness. They're the body of the serpent itself. That's right. The part of the Milky Way we usually ignore? That's where the story lives. In Maori tradition, the Milky Way is known as Te Aikaroa, or the long fish, a cosmic eel that stretches across the sky. Not a metaphor. A literal celestial seafood item. Meanwhile, in the Philippines, the Tagalog name for the Milky Way is Daning Mga Kaluluwa, the path of souls. Not a suggestion. A statement. The dead travel along it after they pass. Just like in many Native American traditions, where the Milky Way is also seen as the spirit road, the place where departed souls walk back to the sky world. Let that image settle into your thoughts as you drift. A sky so bright and clear that you could see the road where spirits walked. Even in South America, among the Inca, the Milky Way held sacred meaning. They called it Mayu, a celestial river that mirrored the actual river down below, the Amazon. And they didn't just see stars. They saw shapes in the darkness. That's right. While European stargazers tried to make patterns out of bright dots, the Inca stared at the shadows, the dark blotches in the Milky Way, and saw animals. A llama, a fox, a serpent, a mother and her child, all hidden in the void. Not the light, but the space between. You see, while the West saw stars as symbols of order, navigation, and status, many other cultures saw the space around them as sacred too. It's like two people staring at clouds. One sees a castle, the other sees the space where the castle isn't and calls that important. You're still awake? Good. Let's drift north. To China, where the Milky Way is known as Inha, the Silver River. There, it's not a road or a river for the dead, but the stage for one of the oldest love stories ever told. A weaver girl, the daughter of the heavens, falls in love with a mortal cowherd. Classic tale. Forbidden love. Family drama. Angry gods. You know the drill. As punishment, they are placed on opposite sides of the Silver River, the Milky Way itself. But once a year, on the 7th day of the 7th lunar month, a bridge of magpies forms across the river, allowing the lovers to meet. This story is over 2,000 years old, and it's still celebrated today, on Qixi, the Chinese Valentine's Day. So next time someone tells you star-crossed lovers started with Shakespeare, you can gently inform them that Chinese stargazers beat him to it by about 20 dynasties. In Japan, the same stars tell the story of Oriheim and Hikoboshi, a weaver princess and a cowherd, separated by the river of heaven. It's the same myth, the same tears, the same annual crossing, because the stars are shared, even when the stories change. Let's visit the Norse, who saw the Milky Way as a path to Valhalla, a fiery bridge for the souls of the brave. And the Slavic peoples? They called it Putmlekni, the Milky Path, a trail of spilled milk from a mother goddess or the remnants of a celestial cow. Yes, even Slavic mythology had a dairy-based cosmology. You can't escape the milk. But what do all these stories have in common? A sky that isn't just beautiful, it's alive. A sky with meaning. A sky where light isn't just photons, it's memory, story, presence. The Milky Way isn't an object. It's a character, a road, a river, a storybook. And you're part of it. Because no matter what part of the world you're in or what century you were born, someone stood where you are now, looked up, and wondered what that white smear in the heavens was. And every culture gave an answer. Different names, different myths, same stars. So as you lie there, half asleep, feeling the gentle pull of rest wash over you, remember, that trail in the sky has been walked by gods, by lovers, by spirits, by weavers and warriors, llamas and serpents, and magpies flying in formation. It is a mirror, a myth, a memory. And even now, somewhere in a desert, a rainforest, or a village without streetlights, a child is staring up at the same strip of sky, giving it a name, and building their own story. Sleep now. You've walked 1,000 legends. You've crossed rivers of starlight. You are one tiny flicker in a sea of ancient dreams. You wake up in a cold stone room that smells faintly of candle wax, damp wool, and the spiritual regret of 700 years of Latin grammar. You're in a medieval university, not a Hogwarts-type situation. Think less enchanting library and more lice, lead ink, and winter all year round. It's the 13th century. You are a scholar, which mostly means you're underpaid, underfed, and overinvested in arguments about the number of angels dancing on pins. You've decided to turn your intellectual might toward the heavens. Specifically, that ghostly white band in the sky that makes no sense and won't shut up about it. The Milky Way. Now, you might think medieval people had no tools for this sort of work. No telescopes. No observatories. No coffee. And you'd be correct. But did that stop them? Of course not. This is Europe. These people tried to calculate the weight of sin using geometry. Let's begin with a man named Robert Grosset Este. Born around 1175, Grosset Este was a bishop, scientist, philosopher, and all-around overachiever in a time when most people were just trying not to die from soup. He believed that light was the first form of the universe. Not metaphorically, literally. He proposed that all matter was formed from expanding spheres of light, sort of like the Big Bang, if the Big Bang had been written by a monk who thought Latin puns were sexy. He thought the stars were made of perfected fire, suspended in crystalline spheres, and that the Milky Way was the light of many faint stars blending into one streak. Which sounds surprisingly accurate, doesn't it? Don't get too excited. His backup theory was that comets were evil exhalations. Moving along. Around the same time, another great mind emerged, Roger Bacon. No relation to the breakfast food, but just as crunchy when roasted by the Inquisition. Bacon believed the Milky Way was not a celestial phenomenon, but rather an optical one. He claimed it existed in the upper atmosphere, a sort of luminous smear caused by sunlight interacting with vapor. A sky fog. A glow smudge. He wrote this down with confidence, right before being tossed in prison for being too interested in things like math and not enough in the church's preferred brand of blind obedience. Then we have Dante Alighieri. Yes, that Dante. Mr. Inferno. You may not know this, but Dante tried his hand at astronomy between penning graphic hell poetry. In his Divine Comedy, he refers to the Milky Way as that white strip which the Greeks called milk. Romantic. But elsewhere, in his work Convivio, he speculates, brace yourself, that the Milky Way is the light of many stars, which cannot be individually distinguished due to their vast distance. Dante, poet, exile, accidental astrophysicist. But not everyone was so thoughtful. Many medieval thinkers clung to the old Aristotelian idea that the Milky Way was caused by the ignition of the vapors in the upper part of the atmosphere. That's right, ignition. Like someone lit a cosmic fart. According to this model, Earth's lower atmosphere was full of wet vapors, because of course it was, and the upper air, being dry and pure, would ignite those vapors at night, creating the Milky Way. Imagine looking up at the sky and thinking, ah yes, flaming mist. Beautiful. Then came the Alphonsine tables, a massive set of astronomical data created in 13th century Spain under the patronage of King Alfonso X. These were some of the most detailed star charts of the medieval world, filled with numbers, positions, and careful observations made by people who spent too much time in towers staring at stars until their eyesight went bad. And yet, no one had a telescope. So even though they carefully measured the positions of planets and stars, they still couldn't resolve the Milky Way into individual points of light. Still, they recorded it. Diligently. Obsessively. Sometimes incorrectly. Because that's what science looked like in the Middle Ages, a lot of effort, some good guesses, and a giant pile of philosophical baggage. But perhaps no one better embodies the madness and genius of medieval cosmology than Thomas Aquinas. Now, Aquinas didn't personally write much about the Milky Way, but his cosmological framework supported a worldview where the heavens were perfect, immutable, and ordered. To medieval Christians, the Milky Way wasn't just an astronomical curiosity. It was a theological statement, a divine symbol, a reflection of God's order. Or, if you were feeling particularly dramatic, a scar in the firmament, a wound left by the fall, or the flood, or whatever other disaster humanity had most recently blamed itself for. To stare at the Milky Way wasn't just to wonder about stars. It was to contemplate sin, or grace, or the invisible architecture of salvation, which, frankly, takes the fun out of stargazing. Wow, look at that beautiful night sky. Yes, it reminds me of mankind's eternal corruption. Cool. Still, not everyone saw it as punishment. Some saw it as promise, a ladder of light leading to the divine, a path for the righteous to walk after death, a signpost for the returning Christ. And for the average medieval peasant, they didn't care what Aristotle or Aquinas thought. They looked up and saw the same thing every other culture saw, a path, a trail of spilled milk, a thing to fear or admire or make up a bedtime story about. Because when you don't have books or telescopes or TikTok to distract you, the stars are all you've got. And so they stared, and wondered, and gave it names, stories, and meanings. Sometimes wrong, sometimes beautiful, often both. You lie there now, blinking slowly, thinking about Aristotle's cosmic gas cloud and Dante's glowing road. The sky is quiet, the stars are still, and the Milky Way stretches above you like an old scar across the face of time. You're part of a lineage, stretching back not decades or centuries, but millennia, of humans trying to explain that strange band in the sky. From fire trails to rivers of souls to poetic guesses about distant stars. The Milky Way has never stopped inspiring stories. It has never stopped confusing scholars. And it has never stopped glowing. Sleep now, little stargazer. You've walked through myths, medieval minds, and more philosophical fog than one person should ever be expected to endure. And we're not done yet. You wake up on the cold floor of a candlelit library, wrapped in a blanket that smells like centuries of pipe smoke and moldy parchment. There's a half-eaten fig next to your head. There are no figs in season. You don't know whose it was. You don't ask questions anymore. You stretch. Your joints pop like twigs. A heavy book thuds to the floor beside you, open to a page that begins, on the secrets of the stars and the emissions of their holy winds. Ah, you've arrived in the weird wing of medieval cosmology. That part of the scriptorium where logic was optional, peer review was non-existent, and heresy was just a side effect of creativity. Welcome to Chapter 9, where we cover the strangest, most fringe theories about the Milky Way ever conceived by medieval minds who clearly hadn't had enough fresh air. This is the celestial equivalent of a flat Earth Facebook group, if it were written in Latin and illuminated with tiny gold angels urinating on Saturn. You're going to love it. Let's begin. First up, one of my personal favorites. The Milky Way is the tale of a giant celestial serpent. No, really. This belief appears in several obscure manuscripts, often cross-referenced with apocalyptic or mystical writings. The idea was that a massive, invisible serpent wrapped itself around the night sky, and the Milky Way was either its glowing tail or the trail it left behind after slithering through the firmament. It was supposed to symbolize divine judgment or perhaps, depending on the author's mood, fertility. Because medieval authors loved to make things weirdly Freudian, 5 centuries before Freud existed. These serpents were often linked to biblical creatures, Leviathan or the dragon of Revelation, except stretched across the stars like a lazily drawn noodle. Sometimes, the serpent was benevolent. Sometimes malevolent. Sometimes, it just was. Like an intergalactic house guest no one invited. It's like someone saw the Milky Way and thought, you know what this needs? A snake. A cosmic snake. With opinions. Perfect. Next, the theory that the Milky Way is angel sweat. Yes, sweat. According to a particularly dusty monk named Brother Ethelric of Doncaster, writing around the early 1300s, the Milky Way is a trail of condensation left behind by angels who labor in the heavens. Because naturally, being holy doesn't mean being immune to perspiration. Brother Ethelric claimed that during periods of divine exertion, such as staving off the apocalypse, guiding souls to paradise, or adjusting the orbits of stars, the angels would begin to sweat, and their holy perspiration would drift across the sky and crystallize into what we perceive as that misty, cloudy band. It raises questions. Do angels use celestial deodorant? Is the Milky Way just a divine gym towel? Should we be concerned? We'll never know, because Brother Ethelric was almost certainly writing this after licking a moldy mushroom. Or maybe just breathing in too many candle fumes in a poorly ventilated bell tower. Either way, 10 out of 10 for creativity. 0 for reproducibility. Moving along to alchemical interpretations. You may think medieval alchemy was all about turning lead into gold. And yes, it was. But also, it was about turning everything into meaning, including the stars. Especially the stars. One particular 15th century German alchemist named Hieronymus of Ulm, a man who once tried to distill the essence of moonlight into a beverage, believed the Milky Way was the sublimated exhalation of Mercury, the alchemical spirit, not the planet. Let's unpack that. In alchemical cosmology, everything had a spiritual twin. So Mercury, the element, wasn't just quicksilver. It was also a messenger between the worlds. According to Hieronymus, the Milky Way was a kind of celestial vapor trail, like perfume left in the air after a ghost ran past you at high speed. He even claimed that certain phases of the Milky Way were linked to prophetic dreams, and that if you brewed a tea during the midnight apex of Mercury's breath, you could see into the future. Spoiler: the tea gave you diarrhea, not visions. Still, his manuscript survived. They're full of swirling diagrams, moons with faces, and suspicious stains. Science? Not exactly. Art? Undeniably. Evidence of what happens when you isolate a moon with too much ink and not enough friends? Absolutely. Now, let's talk cosmic scars. This idea wasn't unique to one person, but shows up in scattered mystical commentaries across Europe between the 12th and 14th centuries. The theory? That the Milky Way is a scar across the sky left by a celestial war. Yes, a war. Not a metaphorical one. A literal, heaven-shattering battle between angels and demons, or, in some cases, competing choirs of stars. The scar was said to mark the spot where Lucifer fell from heaven, dragging light behind him like a burning train. Some versions get even weirder, claiming that God physically tore open the sky to let in divine light, like someone slicing a curtain to peek inside. The Milky Way, in this telling, is the rip, the gash in creation, proof that even perfection has a seam. Is it dramatic? Yes. Accurate? No. But it feels true at 2 a.m. when you're staring out a monastery window and haven't eaten anything but lentils and fear for 2 weeks. And then, there's the theory of reversed rain. This was advanced by a group of fringe monks in 14th century southern France, who believed that the Milky Way was not stars at all, but rather reverse rain. Stay with me. They thought that instead of falling from the sky to Earth, the Milky Way was the result of Earth's sins rising upward, a sort of spiritual steam, accumulating in the upper firmament. A sin fog. A glowing cloud of regrets. The more people sinned, they said, the brighter the Milky Way became. This is a truly beautiful example of medieval logic. See something pretty, assume it's caused by evil. They even wrote sermons about it. See the light in the sky? That is your gluttony. Those white streaks, from fornication. Those shining specks? Pride, mostly from the people in the next village. It's a deeply Catholic version of astronomy. The heavens are a mirror, and you should feel bad about it. And finally, the flat Earth starlight smear theory. Rare, but yes, it existed. Some fringe cosmologies held that the sky wasn't a dome, but a kind of celestial sheet, slightly bent at the edges, like a poorly stretched canvas. In this version, the Milky Way is the result of starlight pooling and smearing at the edges, like paint bleeding through parchment. This theory didn't catch on for obvious reasons. It made no sense. It contradicted the Church's preferred geometry. It was mostly believed by the kind of people who also believed cats were spies for the devil. And yet, it was written down, preserved, illuminated. Someone, somewhere, thought that was a solid explanation. Because if there's one thing we can learn from medieval history, it's that people really hate saying, I don't know. So they said, everything, every theory, every metaphor, every fever dream hypothesis you can imagine, written down, decorated, passed on. And now, hundreds of years later, you're lying in the dark, listening to their voices echo across time, trying to fall asleep. And that's kind of beautiful, isn't it? You, in bed with your phone and your plush duvet. Them, in candlelit towers scribbling by owl light, hoping someone someday would care what they thought. They didn't have telescopes. They didn't have science. But they had awe. And they weren't afraid to be wrong. So sleep now. And let the serpent stars coil above you. Let the angel sweat drift silently across your dreams. Let Mercury's breath swirl through the chambers of your imagination. Because whether it's real or ridiculous, the Milky Way always inspires wonder. And sometimes, that's the whole point. You wake up in 1609. You are still in a library, but this time, it smells sharper, cleaner. There are glass windows now. Someone just invented those, apparently. Your clothes are still itchy. You still haven't bathed in weeks. But there's something different in the air, doubt. The old certainty is dying. People are no longer just believing things. They're looking at them. And nothing, not even the Milky Way, can hide anymore. Enter Galileo Galilei. Yes, that Galileo. The man with the telescope, the heresy trial, and the most stubborn beard in history. In 1609, Galileo took one of the first telescopes, not his invention, but definitely his favorite toy, and pointed it at the sky. And what did he find? He found that the Milky Way, this soft, misty river of milk and myth, wasn't mist at all. It was stars. Not a few. Not dozens. But thousands. Millions. Packed together like a celestial ant colony, forming a glittering smear across the void. Just stars. No angels. No serpents. No divine lactation. Just an enormous, jaw-dropping accumulation of distant suns. Imagine being a monk who had spent 40 years debating whether the Milky Way was God's glory, Satan's fart, or the hole through which the Holy Spirit peeks. Now, some guy with a tube of glass comes along and says, actually, it's just stars, bro. Talk about a buzzkill. The moment Galileo peered through his lens, the entire medieval worldview began to crumble like a communion wafer left out in the rain. He published his findings in Side Reis Nuncius, the Starry Messenger, a modest pamphlet that basically said, hey, everyone, everything you believe is wrong. Also, the moon has craters. Have a great day. Cue the panic. The Church, naturally, was not thrilled. The idea that the heavens weren't perfect and crystalline, that they were messy, full of holes, imperfections, and vast distances, was the theological equivalent of telling a toddler that Santa doesn't pay taxes. People resisted. They argued. They banned books. They burned diagrams. But it was too late. The spell had broken. The sky was no longer a canvas of metaphors. It was a physical place. A chaotic, unknowable realm of physics, matter, and disturbing emptiness. The Milky Way, once the home of gods and myths, was downgraded to a galactic suburb. Billions of stars. Nothing else. It was like discovering that your favorite romantic poem is just a grocery list written in cursive. But not everyone was ready to move on. For a while, people tried to merge the two views. The Milky metaphors lingered. Astronomers would say things like, yes, of course it's stars. But also, perhaps it's a sign of divine harmony, a sacred structure, a cosmic dance. They tried to hang on to the poetry. But the Enlightenment was coming like a battering ram made of rationalism and powdered wigs. Soon, the Milky Way was being measured, mapped, charted in cold, clean diagrams. No more dragons. No more divine trails. No more flaming chariots or holy scars. Just hydrogen, gravity, and unfathomable distance. Now, before you start feeling sad about that, remember, science didn't kill wonder. It just changed it. Because now, instead of imagining the Milky Way as the spilled milk of Hera or the scar from an ancient angel war, we know it's a vast spiral galaxy containing over 100 billion stars. It's 100,000 light-years wide. Our sun is just one speck in an unfathomable swirl. And that is kind of amazing. Because in some ways, the medieval people were right. The Milky Way is divine. Not because of what it says about theology, but because of what it tells us about scale. We are tiny. We are floating in darkness. And yet, we are here, looking up, wondering, always. So as the candle of this story burns down to a stub, and your eyes grow heavy with the sweet exhaustion of historical overexposure, remember this. Somewhere in a monastery, a long-dead monk is smiling. Because even though his serpent theory didn't hold up, you're still thinking about the sky, still asking questions, still feeling awe. And that's all they really wanted. That, and maybe better dental care. So rest now. You've earned it. You've survived centuries of cosmic confusion, milk metaphors, and Latin footnotes. The Milky Way is still out there. Still glowing. Still strange. Good night, stargazer. Sleep tight. And may your dreams be filled with angel sweat, divine snakes, and poorly labeled celestial maps. Because nothing puts you to sleep quite like medieval astronomy. Trust me,